Simple question. Is the process over?
It's officially done. When your fan base turns on you, that's when you know it. We can't win with this team. Joel Embiid is turning 30 years old next year, but as they say, in basketball years, he's already getting closer to 40 than he is 30. I've seen this team for so many years. 6, in fact, get knocked out in the 5 of those 6 years get knocked out in the second round. And at some point, if James Harden leaves, you reach no return. There's no more moves to make. It's over. What can you do? If he walks, you can't replace him, so you have to trade Tobias Harris to offload salary. But this free agent class stinks. There's no replacing him. And then to make it even more frustrating, I don't think you can win a championship with Joel Embiid. Could he prove me wrong? Maybe, but up until this point, he's done nothing in the playoffs. This is 7 years of him being in the league. He has not had a good playoff series where it's like, wow, that was an emphatic statement by an MVP candidate. Last year, he had his biggest moment, a game winner versus the Raptors in Game 3. In that series, that Toronto team, with Pascal Siakam leading them, almost came back from down 3-1 and took the Sixers to 7 games in the first rounds. Joel Embiid was hurt in that series, but because of his injuries and just slow style of play, I don't think he can be the best player in a championship team. And defensively, we're starting to see, well, he's actually not like this perfect two-way player that everyone envisions him to be. The Celtics have kicked their ass for years, and as Joel said back in 2018, this ain't no rivalry. I love Joel. I did. Philly fans did. But when they're turning on their superstar because he's a no-show in Game 7s and he's hurt every single year, that's when you have to turn the page. It's more than over for Philadelphia. I think it's time you trade him to New York. You get yourself a pair of picks and a couple of young players. Justin, what do you think about Joel Embiid, a playoff loser up until this point, but an MVP in New York?
I would be absolutely ecstatic if there's any superstar out there that we can make a move for. I wouldn't push the button just for anybody. I know Stephen A. Smith was out there saying Damian Lillard. No, we got our point guard. It's okay. If you bring us an Embiid with the team that we had this past season, I think the Knicks are ready to contend for a title. But this isn't a segment about the New York Knicks. This is a segment about the 76ers. I do believe the process is over. I mean, James Harden being out there, Doc Rivers now out the door, which was also questionable. If you plan on keeping Embiid, you want to appease your superstar. He was very friendly. He was very high on Doc Rivers. So you let him go, basically dismissing whatever your star player thinks. So already ruffling feathers. It's tough when you look at this Philadelphia team and not to be critical of them, because this is the easiest the Eastern Conference has been in a long time. You have that first round against the Brooklyn Nets. You do your work. You take care of them. Then you go into the second round, in the toughest series yet. You find yourself up 3-2 with a home game in Game 6, and you don't finish it. Okay, you got a second chance. You're going back to Boston, where you have won a game, and then you get demolished. You lose. Jason Tatum puts up a monster game. Your two superstars do not show up in either one of those games for you. And then you would have had the 8th seed Miami Heat, and that's not knocking the Miami Heat, but granted, 8th seed. That is the easiest road to the NBA Finals the Philadelphia 76ers would have had, and they did not seize the opportunity. The process is over. I feel like the process has been over for a while now, but I think all this year has cemented that completely. I think it's time to move on, create something new. You failed with the Ben Simmons project, failed with the James Harden project, and now I'm not going to say Joel Embiid was a complete failure, but he's not changing the game the way Giannis was, and he used that quote that Giannis did about, it wasn't failure, it's a step to success. No, Joel. Not for you, bro. Not for you. You're not a NBA champion. You didn't will your team to a championship just a couple of years ago. Giannis can say that because he won. He took his team to the finals. He dominated. You didn't do that. Process is over. I think it's time to maybe start anew, but will they? I don't think so.
Go ahead, John. You want to say something real quick?
And speaking of that, real quick, I can't tell you how much nonsensical, stupid, naive comments Sixers fans gave because Nikola Jokic won 2 MVPs, but he never did anything in the playoffs. Joel Embiid gets an MVP, and for the 5th time in his career gets bounced in the second round. In fact, his team won Game 1 without him. He comes back for Game 2, and they're getting demolished. Should he have been out there on the floor? Probably not, right? But every year you're hurt. Nikola Jokic has been one of the best playoff performers of our generation, and people try to spin it that he was a playoff choke artist because he couldn't beat the Golden State Warriors. Like everybody else, he got bounced, but with no support. Joel Embiid, for years, needed shooting. You got one of the best shooters in the league, George Neen. You need defense. You need culture pieces. You got D'Anthony Melton and PJ Tucker. You need a better star, James Harden. They need a new coach. They bring in Doc Rivers, who, much like Harden's a playoff fraud, but they've made every single move. They brought in a much better GM. They had Seth Curry and Danny Green. Every single year, Joel Embiid's career, he has choked in the playoffs. Or in 2020, altogether, does not have the support the one year he didn't. But even then, he was dealing with an ankle injury in the bubble. I'm done with him, man. Not only does he have no playoff resume, but he went out with his tail between his legs, and that is the unforgivable thing for Philadelphia fans. He quit on his team. He didn't call for the ball, and James Harden literally was like, you know what? I'm going to do what I did last year. I'm going to disappear in the biggest game of my career, and we're going to see how we do. Well, he got killed. That's how he did.
And you know what? I didn't even touch on the comment where he said everybody else needs to be better. It can't just be him and James. I thought that was so stupid to say when in the biggest games you didn't show up. You have to show up for that. That's the point. That's the reason you make as much money as you do. There's a reason you're the MVP. You need to show up for those games. Don't look to everybody else. You know, as a Knicks fan, I expect my all-pro, all-NBA power forward Julius Randle to show up in a playoff game. And when he doesn't, well, yeah, everybody else needs to show up. You need to take accountability and say, that was on me. He obviously he's not like that, but I mean,
and he did, to his defense, because everyone wants to defend him right now. He did say, Justin, he's like, look, in order for us to win a championship, we all have to be better. I have to be better. James has to be better. And then people took that quote at the end where he says, our role players can be better too. And people like me took that. I didn't watch the interview. I was like, oh wow, Joel really just said that. And then I had to go back and listen to the entire thing. I was like, okay, it's still stupid as shit to say that. Even mentioning it can't be me and James, because you guys rub off on your teammates. When you are nervous and that energy is felt by the fans, it's going to be felt by your teammates. So no kidding, they didn't show up in the second half because you did not show up. Jimmy Butler's teammates always come clutch in the playoffs. Why? Well, he always comes up clutch. When the superstar is reliable, it so happens, basically, if you have a good supporting cast around you, which Philadelphia does, those supporting players will play much better. But when you're counting on them to knock down one spot up through after another because you can't create for yourself and rely on your teammates to knock down 40% of their triples to beat Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, you're not going to win the math game. You're just not going to get a W in the end.
Okay. Yeah. Talk to him. So where do I want to start? Let's start with the culture pieces, right? 100% John's correct in the last thing he said about Jimmy Butler showing up. It's a culture piece. When you have guys like a Joel Embiid and a James Harden who kind of have similar body languages when their teams are down and getting a run put on them to a Ayton, a Julius Randle, and people like that, that's not good. Kenny Smith, I think, spoke on it multiple times. You can never question an NBA player's passion, but you can question their effort. That is very visible, and he's brought up points where you can just watch the tape, and if you look at a guy who's laboring up the court, not giving his full effort, you can see if a guy's giving his full effort to get up the court or not. That's very easy to see. But yeah, so in terms of, is the process over? I've always been on the train where I don't believe I believe Joel Embiid can get shut down more with relative ease than, let's say, a forward or a guard who's got the ball in his hands and really can, create off the perimeter towards himself and doesn't have to get the ball in the post and create there. But he has come up small every year, like John said. He hasn't gotten past the second round. He said, there's stepping stones. This is a step towards success. It's not, because a step towards success would actually be taking a step forward, not staying in the exact same place every single year. In terms of Doc Rivers getting fired, I didn't necessarily agree with that. And I know John is, he's taking his shots and joked on him, the chokes and all that, which are completely factual and 100% warranted. That, listen, they happened. But Doc Rivers is a Hall of Fame coach. He is, because he's got top 10 in wins, John. I think he's ninth, and every single other head coach on that list is a Hall of Famer. So he is a Hall of Fame head coach. He has won a championship. Yes, has he blown the most leads and this and that? Yeah, but he's still you have to give credit to a guy who is able to get there too as well. And you should actually know that for being, saying LeBron is the GOAT, coming up short all the time in the finals and only winning a couple. But
I'm going to look at the NFL top winners right now because
NBA.
I'm looking at NFL to see if there's a relevant fraud, because there's always going to be an imposter, and you can, as a great coach, and Tom Thibodeau says, Justin, you can spin numbers to tell you whatever they want to tell you. And that's actually Tom Thibodeau quote. Actually, in the NFL, there's not a fraud like Doc Rivers in the top 20. But my point is that, Brent, Doc Rivers, he's done great with teams with no playoff expectations. But after coaching the Big Three Celtics in 2008, he has done nothing in the playoffs.
Well, let me ask you a question, right? Because I hear what you're saying, and I know what you're saying. Those Clipper teams ever really have any business competing for a championship? I mean, Chris Paul was their best player, and I love Chris Paul. He's a top 5 point guard of all time, but your best player is a 6-foot point guard in a game of giants. Blake Griffin is supposed to be that guy. We know Blake Griffin's limitations. He can't shoot outside of 5 feet. That was a very big problem. Okay, while the team was built very well, Lob City and all, it really wasn't. It was more conducive of Showtime and box office numbers and not winning a championship. Then we go from him to, what does he go? He goes to Philly now, and you have lamented on all the players. You go through, Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons. They have Jimmy Butler. They chose Tobias over Jimmy. That wasn't Doc's decision. I don't even know if Doc was even the head coach at that time.
He's not.
Yeah, you got then you get James Harden, another playoff choker. Like, I understand, but I understand the I get it all, right? But in basketball, I've always said this. In football, head coaching and players meet, it's kind of more 50-50 in football, while in basketball it's more 75-25 in my opinion, towards the players and then the coaches. Okay. And so when you see all these blown leads, right, for Doc Rivers, I would just go back and look at all the games too, and let me know if any of his star players showed up, because you've already talked.
I mean,
about
Chris Paul was playing pretty well in 2015 when they blew a 3-1 lead to the Houston Rockets and playoff choke artist and James Harden, right?
Yes, he did. Chris Paul did. Yes, Chris Paul did 100%. But again, I told you, Blake Griffin was their second best player and was supposed to take that. Was supposed to be that guy, and we all know Blake Griffin really wasn't never going to be that guy. He had his limitations. But again, I'm just saying, I understand
your team, Bren, was not overwhelmingly better. They were a worse team, and they still came up clutch.
Yeah.
I mean, Blake Griffin, he played, let me check. Yeah, he played every single game that postseason, and in games 5, 6, and 7, he played pretty darn well. 30-16, 27-11 in an elimination game.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that to me is a sign of poor coaching. When you did it in Orlando, you did it twice in the Clippers' tenure with both Chris Paul and Kawhi Leonard. I think you and I both agree, blowing that 3-1 lead to the Nuggets was a lack of composure on their side. They made no adjustments.
Well, no.
Years later, in 2022 or 2023, this season, Blake Griffin was in a post-game press conference, and he says, they made no adjustments, which is not an unusual thing about his former coach and Doc Rivers. Because what do you think makes a great head coach?
Adjustments, yes, adjustment. But
what else? Composure. Doc Rivers has no composure. He just throws stuff at the wall, and it usually doesn't stick.
But
mess.